One is commoditisation. It's quite difficult to actually make your product seem different to someone else. The margins are being squeezed all the time. So it means you've really got to drive efficiencies. But the cost of compliance for businesses is high. Companies need to look at the customers as consumers of a broader range of financial services, not just moving money from A to B.
Hi everyone and welcome to the RPR podcast. I'm Natalie Perkins from Remittance, and today we're exploring a question many operators are asking. Is simply moving money enough to build a successful remittance business? So we'll discuss how the industry is changing, where future growth will come from, and what operators should be doing to stay ahead. So joining me today is Leon Isaacs, who has spent more than 30 years helping shape the remittance industry. So from senior roles at companies including MoneyGram to advising banks, governments and international organisations, he's really had a front row seat to how the industry has evolved and where it's heading next. I'm also joined by Oussama Kseibati, Head of Business Services at Remittance, who'll be sharing what he's seen from operators and how these industry trends are playing out in practice. So Leon, Oussama, it's great to have you both with us today. So Leon, you've spent over 30 years in the remittance industry. Looking back, what do you think has changed the most?
Well, Natalie, first of all, it's great to be here. Secondly, that's an almost impossible question to answer because when I started out, I was at MoneyGram. We had one location in the whole of the continent of Africa. We were competing with Western Union, but we were really just starting as well. Every transaction then was cash to cash. There was very little in the way of the levels of KYC and compliance that we currently see. There was no technology. You've got to think this was before the internet, really. Mobile phones were just getting over that big brick status. So everything, how a remittance operates, has probably changed, but the customer hasn't changed that much, really. The business is still driven by people who've moved from one country to another to improve their livelihoods. It's still driven by their need to support their families back home. All that's changed is how the money moves and probably what they do with the money. So
yeah.
Lots has changed. But
lots have changed. The technology has made it a completely different space. But what about like the landscape as well in terms of the amount of competitors and, that side of things as well?
Yeah, so back in that day, it was really Western Union, and they weren't even as big as they are now. And probably for 10 years, there was just Western Union and MoneyGram as the two operators. And then now we see, I'd say, a handful, maybe 10 truly global companies and many, many regional or corridor specialists. But there's not as many global companies as you would expect. But the other thing that's happened is, in the past, the companies used to do everything themselves, the settlement or build the technology, handle all the compliance requirements. Now, if you look at the value chain, you'll see many, many more specialists doing pieces of work. I mean, you guys didn't exist back then, for instance, but now, look at the role you're playing. That's a key role for the industry as an enabler. I think what we're seeing is many companies coming in and helping to improve a little piece of the chain or to bring efficiency, to help reduce the costs, reduce the friction. And that's a big change. So I'm surprised we don't see more companies that are customer facing. But actually what we do really see is lots of companies that are trying to help improve the process for those companies that are customer facing. And I suppose the other two things I would say is, one, we obviously have mobile money companies now that we didn't have before, and they have a key role to play. And the other thing would be that back in those days, it was really banks that people thought of. That was where you would go to transfer your money. And of course, they still play a massive role in this industry, even if they don't always focus on these customers, but they still play a big role. So it's quite interesting how it's evolved.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more known about it. The other thing I would say is that when we started, governments and international development bodies didn't really know anything about remittances. And their awareness and the good that they can do, or as a vehicle for helping people improve their livelihoods, has really grown over this period, which has helped bring more attention on the industry.
That's good. And what do you think customers kind of expect today that they didn't do sort of like 10 years ago?
That's a good question. I think actually I'm going to say some of the things they expect are exactly the same. They've always been the same. They want to trust the product. They need security. They want to have a fair price, and they want certainty, I suppose. But what they want now is the money to get there instantly for the person at the other end to be able to know that the money's been received however they want to receive it. There's so many different ways that the money can be received now. They don't want to pay very much, if anything, at all for it. And they want to be able to choose the product that they want, not have no choice. In the old days, it was basically you use product A or product B because that was all that was available. Now they want to be able to choose, which is actually a bit of a dilemma for a lot of the operators, because in the past we had a lot of loyalty, because it was very painful to change. The only reason you change is if a service didn't work and the receiver said, I didn't get my money, or it took me 2 weeks, or I had to travel 5 hours to go to a location to collect the money. Now, most of that has gone or is going. And so people find it much easier to choose one product over another with automation. And that makes it harder for companies to actually keep customers loyal.
Yeah, and I think that actually brings us really nicely to kind of the next sort of section of the podcast, where we're going to talk about like pressure on MTOs, and how technology has changed things so much, but actually there is a lot more pressure on MTOs to deliver certain things. So Leon, that was a really good summary, I think, of what has changed over the last 10 years, going back further, and customer expectations are a lot higher than what they used to be. Technology has changed the landscape. But what would you say are kind of the main pressures on the MTOs at the moment?
As always, you wouldn't ask the question if there weren't a lot of pressures, but if I picked out three, I think one is commoditisation. It's quite difficult to actually make your product seem different to someone else. So that becomes quite a challenge for businesses when they're trying to explain how they're different, when ultimately you're moving money from A to B for a certain price. Ultimately, there's a danger that price becomes the differentiator, which sort of leads to the second challenge. Is there is a big amount of pressure on revenues for customers, because as there are new businesses either that come in or certain businesses are getting older, the margins are being squeezed all the time. So it means you've really got to drive efficiencies, particularly in the back office. The model has changed quite a bit from where the cash to cash model, you needed to have agents at both ends. So you are having to pay the agents a big slice of the pie. Now there are opportunities where maybe you don't have to do that if you're not relying on agents. If you're going straight into an account, you can actually obviously have a lower cost base for that. I think the other area for me, and I'm surprised we've gone this far without saying it, is around regulation. The amount of regulation there is now is very high. I think because of automation, it's easier to track payments very easily. It's easier to compare people with the watch lists and so on. All of that can be automated at relatively low unit cost. I think there's more expectation on companies that not only will you track those payments, you'll understand every last detail about them. And I'm sure we'll talk about AI and things like that can definitely help. But the cost of compliance for businesses is high. And the other thing is, if you operate in multiple jurisdictions, you're not dealing with one global regulation. you're dealing with however many different regulations there are in each country you're in. And that's really difficult if you're trying to run a multi-country business. The costs there and just the expertise in acquiring it is really difficult. So those are, I think, some of the big challenges.
Yeah, so it's the remittances being commoditized, price isn't necessarily a differentiator anymore, and the cost of compliance. Oussama, would you agree with Leon on those points? Is that kind of what you're hearing from operators that you speak to on a sort of day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. We're hearing things from some of my clients that some of the compliance costs are starting to really build up, and that affects obviously their bottom line and how they can mitigate some of that by having the right tools in place, by having the right software in place. That can take a lot of the load off the compliance officers and the compliance process, which can lower your costs. And that's a big factor at the moment. It's cost. What are your charges compared to someone else's charges, and how do you keep those charges down? Because what tends to happen is someone might offer exchange rate, but then the likes of Western Union, some of the bigger guys, might offer a lower exchange rate, and it's like pulling a plug on a bathtub. It's a fight to the bottom, basically, right? So how do you differentiate yourself from the others for client retention, to really sort of keep those clients with you using your software, and carry on.
Yeah, and it sounds like those pressures aren't really going away. And money transfer operators really need to think differently now about how they grow. So, Leon, if the kind of like traditional model of remittances was under all this pressure, where do you think the biggest opportunities for growth will be?
Well, from my viewpoint, there's a few different areas. I think you've got operationally. In the past, you used to have a lot of specialists who would send money from A to B, cash to cash, or possibly something digitally. Now I think it's changed. And I think that you have to offer as many different choices as the customer really wants. The model sort of changed from, in the past, a company would try and do as much as it possibly could in-house without forming partnerships or two-way partnerships. That's now changed. And, I think what we're seeing is multiple businesses working with multiple partners to deliver many, many different solutions to people. So I think the growth has to come from giving the customers as many choices as possible, because it's now economically possible for companies to do that. I think the second point I'd say is that we mentioned about commoditisation earlier. Now, if you look at it, we need more products. Companies need to look at the customers as consumers of a broader range of financial services, not just moving money from A to B. So, I know you guys offer things like airtime top up and those types of things, but I think it's going to be broader than that as well. It's going to be savings accounts, working with banks or financial service providers in the receiving countries to offer the types of products that somebody in a Western country is already able to access. So actually helping those people, if you like, secure their financial futures by using a whole range of products. And as money transfer companies, got to get in on that action, because what will happen otherwise is companies that do that, say in Senegal, will have an operation in France that is talking directly to the customer, and it's going to cut out the actual movement of the money from France to Senegal. So if you want to be in this business, you're going to have to offer a much broader range of products, really.
Yeah. And Oussama, are you seeing this kind of theme when you speak to operators as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this ties into my previous point, where how do you first differentiate yourself from some of the other players out there if rate's not quite the issue? And that's by offering multiple services. Like, I know you mentioned prepaid cards, or it could be airtime, or it could be mobile phone top up, or it could be things like remit now and pay later. So you do microfinance and loans and things like that, and sort of bringing that all into one area. Because what you don't want happening is that maybe you don't offer that service, and then they go look for somewhere else, and the place that they find does offer a multitude of services, and they might not come back to you. So that's the real risk there.
Yeah. So growth, I think, is actually clearly changing. And the next challenge for leaders is knowing where they should actually invest kind of their time and money, isn't it? So you mentioned lots of different products and services, but where do MTOs actually start? Which are the right things for them to choose next? Um, in the industry, we hear lots of buzzwords going around, don't we? But Leon, how do leaders decide which things to listen to and which things are kind of just hype?
Well, that's a difficult question because I've asked myself that for 30 years and you just never really know, do you? But there's certain trends that we see that are clearly becoming, I think, really important. AI, which I'll probably let you talk about a bit more, Oussama. But I think generally there's sort of two strands at the moment. One is harnessing technology to really make the business as efficient and low cost as possible. So AI is a good example in terms of KYC and compliance of being able to handle lots of data in a very efficient manner. I think you look at things like stable coins, which are a bit of a buzzword at the moment, but certainly we're starting to see some initial forays where the use of stablecoins is helping with settlement, say, in developing countries in particular, where there's not much liquidity or people don't want to hold the local currency. So it's actually being used or trialed as a default there. And I think there's a lot of potential in that. I think where we've seen a lot of noise, probably a bit less, is around, you said buzzwords. I don't know whether crypto's a buzzword now or an old word, but there's always been a lot of talk about the potential of crypto. I don't really see it in the remittances space, except for people who want to trade, because it's not a settlement tool as such. It's a
Or investment tool, and people are using it nowadays.
Exactly, it's an investment tool for people to try and build up their level of wealth, but it's not a tool that you would expect a business to use in any of its operations. So for me, it's very much about actually at that back office end to get the costs out. And then I think at the front office end, then people should be looking at AI and other tools to actually understand more about the customer. If there's one thing I would say is the industry has been extremely poor about understanding customers in the past. In the past, it was very much transaction based because of sort of how I said it was all cash based services, but it was all focused on that transaction. And in fact, I don't think any money transfer company had any form of customer loyalty or retention plan until about 2015. So, and even now, it's not nearly as strong as it could be. So that's one of the things I think where technology can help.
And Osama, coming back to the stable coins point, um, is that something that you're seeing clients use as well? Is it something that's actually practically being used, or is it just still being talked about?
No, it's actually being used in practice now. It's slowly it's starting to come into play for the last leg or the end mile for the end user. But what we're also starting to see is actually companies themselves using stablecoin to either pre-fund or post-fund, and because of the swiftness of that transaction, they don't have to sort of pre-fund in such a large amount of time, especially if they've got cash flow problems. So they could send their partner a bunch of transaction instructions, and then within sort of a very short period of time, they can then fund for those transactions through stablecoin and have them processed. So we are seeing quite a bit of that happening. Yep. In terms of the AI,
Yeah.
I would say it's starting to be more and more sort of implemented, not just on the compliance side, which is great, to cut costs and really do the KYC, the ID verification, facial recognition, which is now part of PSD3, which has to be carried out now, which is all part of AI. So it will match the face of the ID that's being provided on the mobile phone app, because as Leon mentioned, a lot of the transactions today, we've moved away from sort of the cash-based, agent-based, and we're moving more towards the digital and mobile phone. So how do you then, capture that information and process that information through AI? I think the other main area people are starting to use AI is, as Leon touched upon, is understanding your client, understanding their behaviors. So understanding when are they trading and then why they're trading. Is it rate based or is it monthly based? And then, is there something that they can do to then increase those volumes by maybe giving them a nudge when it's at a certain rate for a particular corridor or a particular season? They know that someone sends money for tuition fees on a regular basis, and they'll be sending them information around that. But yeah, without understanding your client, you won't be able to do any of that.
So yeah, thanks, Oussama. I think that's some interesting points. So we've talked about how the industry is changing, and if we kind of finish on imagining someone is just about to start their journey in remittance. So Leon, if you think, an MTO has just got their license and they're just about to start, what would be the advice that you give them?
I think firstly, be really clear about what it is your unique point of differentiation and really build on that. If you're customer facing, be really clear about your proposition, but actually make sure you're offering as many choices as possible. You've got to understand your customer and give them what they want, not give them part of what they want. So I think to do that, you need to form lots of partnerships. In the past, people were scared of partnerships. Now the whole industry is built on partnerships. So I think form partnerships, find a service provider who can give you the most efficient product possible and work with them. Don't spend your whole time doing the technology yourself or trying to find solutions unless that's your speciality, in which case you're probably not a customer facing person. But really focus on what you're good at. And I would say don't look at a remittance as a transfer from A to B. Look at a remittance customer as a shopper for a whole broad range of financial services and try and meet those needs.
So what's one mistake that you tell them to avoid?
Well, two things really. If I had a penny for every time someone called me up and said, Oussama, I'm speaking to them about which corridors they want to operate in, and they say, look, I want to take over the world. And it's never a good idea. It's those ones who you see, like, what I say to them is, think big, but start small, and then go from there. Maybe tackle a corridor which you're familiar with, which you might be, part of the community, which you understand, and then go from there. Obviously, you've got to think about there's pre-funding involved there, and the more corridors you have, the more partners you have, that might get more difficult. So I always say to them, think big, start small, and move from there. So really get your feet under the table, understand the industry, understand the environment, and then go from there. The other mistake a lot of them do is trying to build their own software, as Leon mentioned. I mean, they're a remittance company. There are all sorts of nuances to building technology, regulatory nuances, APIs, connection nuances if you're connecting with other partners. And not just that, you tend to find that people who do then invest in developing their own system, they've outsourced just the development of that system, so it's not ongoing. So you find it deprecates pretty quickly. In 2-3 years time, the system looks old, it's no good anymore, and then they have to come again and develop another whole new system. But if you give that a responsibility to a technology company, that's all they're doing day in, day out. They're working on that technology, working on new features, new functionality, making it look nice and fresh, keeping up with the industry. That allows you then to concentrate on the business side of the money transfer operating.
Yeah, no, I think that's been some really valuable advice from you both for those that are just starting out. So just a closing question then, Leon. If you'd like listeners to remember just one thing from today's conversation, what would that be?
I think it's very clear. Focus on what is really important to you. Control the things that are most important to your business and outsource and partner everything else. That way you'll be able to stick to what you're good at and you'll be able to succeed.
Okay, so Leon, Oussama, thank you so much for joining us today. and for sharing your insights. One thing that really stood out from today's discussion is that the future of remittances isn't just about moving money. The operators that succeed will be the ones that understand their customers, embrace the right technology, and continue to evolve alongside the market. So thank you for listening to the IPR podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow us for more conversations on innovation in payments and remittances, and we'll see you next time.